Hey folks, welcome and thanks everybody for joining our webinar on Is the Modern Data Stack Enterprise Ready? Very excited to have y'all. So I am Ben Stansel. I am one of the founders of Mode, which is a modern BI platform designed around data teams. So at Mode, I work very closely with our internal data team and spend a lot of time talking to customers, including a number of enterprise customers and other founders in the data space. And so this is a pretty frequent topic of conversation is essentially where is the modern data stack in its hype cycle, and especially like, is it something that can actually graduate into being a product that is ready for the enterprise and for the very big businesses? For this conversation today, I'm thrilled to be joined by a couple folks, by Sanjeev and Darren. Sanjeev was a vice president at Gartner for a long time and has a whole wealth of insights on the business intelligence landscape and the data landscape in general. And then Darren is a director of product at VMware, which is obviously a large enterprise in their own right. And a longtime customer of Mode. So he is a practitioner who's been working on these sorts of problems for a long time and trying to bring a more modern approach to the enterprise. So before we dive into some of the content, I'd love to have both of y'all introduce yourselves. Sanjeev, I'll turn it over to you first.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's such a pleasure to join you as always is, and Darren, my new good friend. We are going to talk about a lot of topics that are very much in my sweet spot. I love talking about data and analytics. I've been doing it for almost 3 decades now. I started my career at Oracle, then I went into consulting, spent many years there, and then joined Gartner, where I was responsible for directing the research in the data and analytics space. So my topics include pretty much all of data management. I keep my coverage pretty wide. I've added ChatGPT to it now that it's AI is so hot. So excited to be on this event today.
Awesome. Good to have you. And Darren.
All right, thanks, Ben. Hello, everyone. My name is Darren. I lead analytics for the R&D business unit at VMware. In my role, I actually have 2 stakeholders. One is for the product development team, including leadership. We want to support the team to make sure that we have insight into how the product is being used, just so we can build the best product possible for our customers. And secondly, we want to expose some of the analytics and insight that we have learned to our customers, give them visibility, observability about their environment as well. I have been most of my career. I always involve data either from building a product or from supporting bringing the product to market. So I'm very excited to be here with everyone today.
Awesome. So Darren, I'd love to start with you. Sanjeev and I are both kind of talking heads at this point. You're in the trenches actually doing this work. I would love to hear a little bit more. You gave us a little bit of a scratch on the surface of what your team does, but a little bit more of a walkthrough of what your team is responsible for. And then since obviously this conversation is about data tooling and the modern data stack, what does your stack actually look like, and sort of how did you arrive at the place you are today?
So my team, what we do, because we are an enterprise software company, so we actually receive a lot of telemetry data about how the configuration, how the deployment, how customers are operating our product in their environment. And we actually need to make sure that the data is in the shape and form that can draw intelligent, meaningful conversation between the product and engineering team to say, are we doing the right thing for the customer based on their usage, based on adoption? Do we give them the aha moments that they deserve for using our products? So as you know, like there's a lot of things that go into data to try to figure out, especially it's a machine data, so that the data is huge. And then our job is to make sure that we have that infrastructure just so the product development team can use the data to inform, to better inform in the job.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Go ahead.
And then the second part of your question is about the data stack. So we so we use collections of different tools in each of the layer of the data stack. The data warehouse will actually build a tool in-house, a data platform in-house, And then for BI, we remote because we are in R&D. So we really want to do a few things, especially the democratizing analytics. So meaning we want to provide not just the data, but also the tools for our team to be able to come in. And a lot of them are engineers, so they prefer to, hey, let me just write SQL. You guys show me the data. We will write SQL. So the BI tool, we build a dashboard, we build report, and then we actually also a data set and models. But we also allow our stakeholders, the engineers, the product managers, to be able to write SQL and pull down into the data to find the insight that they need to be doing well in the job.
Awesome. So I have a question about when we talk about sort of the modern data stack, we talk about like maturity curves and things like that a lot. And there's a lot of, these are sort of how companies step up the maturity curve and add more things to their data toolkit and those sorts of things. And it's often coming from a perspective of companies that are growing. So it's like startups that become bigger companies, and sort of there's a path to be able to expand in that way. I think your case is interesting because you didn't come from like a growing startup. Like, y'all modernize basically an existing set of tools. And so this was actually a question that somebody submitted kind of beforehand. But what are sort of strategies that you have for actually bridging the gap for like adopting modern tools on top of what is an existing older set of technology, an older org? Like, how did you get from what VMware probably had 10 years ago to where it is today? Whereas a lot of the conversation in the industry is about like how to go from zero to the modern data stack instead of how to go from something that's existing to the modern data stack. Like, what was that journey like for y'all?
Okay. Is it the Sanjeev or do you want me to answer first?
I'd love to hear from you first. As the person who actually did it. Sanjeev, I'd like to hear kind of your take on. You've seen people do this successfully as well.
Cool. So situation first. So we are in R&D, and as you know, R&D people are pretty impatient. So if we are waiting for the enterprise machine to get the things that we want, it's gonna take too long for us. So essentially, there are different. When we begin to embark on the transformation, our company also on the transformation to SaaS and subscription company, and we do realize right away that we need data. Everything with SaaS, we need a lot of data. And of course, waiting for enterprise may be too long. So what we do is we begin to, maybe we can start with something small and build different modules. So there are different approach here. One, we can just adopt an end-to-end stack from someone, but that actually requires it may not meet all our requirements. It could be very expensive. And then we don't have the flexibility of choice in those cases. So we start small first with based on the requirements of what layers we need to solve first, and then we solve that layer, and then we say, for the data warehouse, this actually is important, and we also are a cloud company, so maybe we can build on top of it. So initially we just use Redshift, but then eventually we should build a data platform. And then we need a BI tool that actually sit on our platform just so we can, and then we have some business requirements. So in that regard, when we spin up our data stack for the R&D business unit, it's actually a bit, not exactly because we have more money than startup, obviously, but it's still kind of in that regard, like we pick we have the business requirements, and then we try to see which one is the best to fit into those requirements. How do it make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah. Sanjeev, as someone who has now seen this across like dozens of companies, what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, I just have a quick clarification I want to ask Darren. Did you say you started with Redshift, but now you use it? Is that?
Yes. So before we can build anything, then we and the business requirement is like now. So we use some of the tool that we already have in-house. So it's easy to choose a big name, but eventually we graduate our, but because there are more requirements, and we have the engineering team that are capable to do it to fit our requirements. So and then go ahead.
So I what I was trying to get at, Ben, is I'm getting a feel that you have built a lot of stuff which is commodity in-house, which most organizations cannot do, like, and should not do. In fact, Ben, you asked, like, from like looking at literally dozens of migrations, I would say I've seen over 100 talking to different clients. I tell them that don't build something that's commodity, because that's technical debt that somebody has to then maintain down the road. And especially when it comes to the storage layer, the problem that I see, so you're right. Going from greenfield to modern data stack is actually an easy journey, because you have no baggage that you're bringing with you. Modernization gets really hard, and modernization happens a lot of times when organizations are going to move from on-prem to the cloud. That's when for the first time they start looking at, for example, you may be on premises and maybe you have Microsoft stacked with a lot of like SSIS and some of the older technology, or you're an IBM shop and you have data stage for ETL. Now you're going to move to AWS. Now you've got choices, like you could use cloud native like Glue, or you could use third party like DBT or Matillion or Prophecy or any of these. So the problem that happens is IT data teams immediately jump to the conclusion that, oh, it's easy. Migrating data is not a problem. We will figure out what are the differences between an on-prem database and a cloud data warehouse, and we'll do the mapping. The problem happens when you start moving the business logic, whether it's your models, your transformation code, because there's so much of customization that has gone in that you cannot use an out-of-the-box tool that'll do 100% migration of your business logic. So those migration projects, which you thought would take you 6 weeks, end up taking 6 months and costing a lot more.
Yeah, data is easy until someone is doing it, right?
Yes, they're Yeah, in fact, I talked to one of the largest financial services company that migrated to the cloud. They finally came to a stage where they said, you know what, we cannot wait. Let's just start moving things into the cloud. And they realized that they had 1,800 machine learning models, out of which more than 1,000 were not used for years. They were trained on old data, but they were now sitting, costing them money in the cloud, and also exposing the company to risk, because if somebody ran those models, they would get wrong results because those models were not updated. But migrating the whole thing is easier than shutting down things and then seeing what breaks and then only moving things that are absolutely critical to move to the cloud.
So I have two questions here. I want to start with a tactical thing for Darren, and then a bigger question, perhaps getting at some of the points you're bringing up here, Sanjeev. So Darren, you mentioned, and Sanjeev, you touched on some of this stuff too. You mentioned it's basically like you have to do it. You have to focus on the small things a little bit, like the whole do it all at once. I know, Sanjeev, you're saying in some ways like that's necessary, but like in practice, you can't sort of have like a 3-year migration. Like you got to sort of start pieces off. I'm curious, Darren, like tactically, if you were someone just landing in a company to do this, like where is the easiest place to start? Like, is it pick up the warehouse and move it to the cloud? Is it replacing a BI tool? Is it replacing transformations? Is it like say you have a thing that is all legacy on-prem, Oracle, IBM, stuff like that. What is actually the easiest part to start with? It's like you can kind of pick it up and lift it and move it to something more modern.
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I couldn't say easiest, but I think we should start with the layer that have the most value and closer to the users and have the less risk. So that could be the BI layer. Because then we will learn ultimately is the output, right? So what value and then what we expose to our audience. So I would think we start with the BI layers, have the requirements on what our audience wants, and then through that process we can learn a lot about the requirements. and then we can begin to see like, okay, in the rest of the data stack, how can we choose the tool that actually fit with the requirements. So ultimately, I'm a fan of having the audience to dictate to help us with the requirements, because ultimately we have to serve it. So I would say that could be the place where we started, and I think we did start it that way too. Easy, Redshift, put everything on Redshift, and then try to figure out what is the layer that interfacing with the audience.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. That's actually in some ways like the opposite of what I would have expected. I mean, it makes sense of like start with basically the user-facing stuff. It'll help figure out what people want. It'll sort of help dictate the rest of the transition. It feels like when people do this, a lot of times that's where they go last. Is like, what if we can just switch out the engine and nobody notices? But in practice, I could actually see that being kind of to Sanjeev's point, like it's very hard to get that right if you actually have no sense of like what's happening on sort of the user layer without doing that. So it's actually kind of interesting direction. Okay,
Yeah.
so the question I'm going to ask, it's like a little bit of a step back from this. So Sanjeev, you were sort of alluding to like this is a very hard thing. If you have 1,800 models and 1,000 you're never using and all that sort of stuff, and there's like a big effort to actually make this migration. So to kind of ask the question, is the title of this webinar, is it worth it? Like, is the modern data stack, and sort of we can define that in a moment, but is the kind of thing that we have come to understand is the modern data stack ready for this moment? Like, should we be actually making this migration, or are we just kind of chasing a hype cycle?
So can I say, it's interesting, Ben, you said Darren's answer was opposite of what you were expecting. It's actually opposite of what I was expecting too, but for entirely different reasons. So I think the technical team's first intuition is, how do we move this stack to the cloud or modernize it or whatever it may be? But I think that's not the right way to look at it. We have to look at it from the workload, from the business point of view, and we have to then see what is the strategy and what does the stack look to modernize it for, let's say, marketing department. Let's say we start with marketing. Because it is not about the BI, it's not about the storage. Maybe the way I've done things were batch, they were ETL, and now I've got more data sources because marketing team now went and got Marketo, and they've got stuff in Jira, and they've got Clickstream. So the workload has expanded, and to do that, I need to maybe move from batch to batch and streaming. I'm not saying you should just move to streaming just because it's a cool thing. I have to then understand how can I maybe do not ETL, ELT, because it is so much easier to spin up a compute cluster within seconds in the cloud and run a job that earlier on I could not run because I was restricted by my on-premises database capabilities. So you really have to think different, security, governance, data residency, all those things. So my point is, you take a use case and you migrate the entire use case. And then you take the next use case. So you build out the beauty of cloud is that it's so modular. If I need more resources, I can add more resources. If I need to change the instance type for a different workload, yes, I can do mixed workloads. I could not do that on premises. So I think we need to think business outcome-driven migration.
So should we be doing it? Should we be doing it at all? Is the modern data stack, is this like a worthwhile transition for companies to make, given that effort?
Darren, what do you think? You're in the hot seat.
Is it very simple to us, right? The question is it worth it? My answer is, can we afford not to do it? There's always new competition. There's always new technology. There's always new business requirements. And do we want to get stuck in the past with the legacy data stack? Can we afford not to do it? And the answer is obvious. Like, we can't. If we don't want to be obsolete in a few years. So the question, the true question gonna be how to do it the right way, the easy way, the best way. And I think a lot of us still try to figure that out, and we do a lot of trial and error along the way, and we try to learn from each other.
Darren hit the nail on the head. It's not about whether you should or not. It's how well you do it is a question, and that's a very difficult question. In fact, it's so difficult that you can see so many surveys show that 30% of cloud cost is wasted. It's over provision. So obviously people are saying, well, where's my ROI? They didn't do the migration correctly. So that's a tough one. But if we get that, then it is definitely the right move.
So I want to return to the bit on cost in just a moment. We have an audience question about cost, and this has become a hot topic among the people who talk about such things. But before that, one of the things too is like, okay, can we afford not to do it? The answer is okay. We have to be able to do this because this sort of, we will get left behind if we don't, and those sorts of things. There is a little bit of like an implicit something underneath that of what it is, of like, what are we migrating? And so there's a question from an audience of basically like a lot of tools are considered the modern data stack. If you look at things like Matt Turk's diagram, which I'm sure we have all seen, there's like thousands of categories and stuff like that. What is the baseline of the applications that you actually need to use for the modern data stack? Like, do we need to migrate every single little detail? Are there a handful of things? Like, what are the most important parts of this? If we're saying, Darren, we have migrated our data stack to something more modern. Does that mean everything? Does that mean just like a handful of kind of key pieces? Like, what are kind of the key tent poles in this for you?
Oh, actually, for this one, I'm curious to hear Sanjeev's opinion as well. Because like migration, we do a lot of trial and error. So, but in terms of the industry, I'm kind of curious how the industry in general, that what you observe from your clients.
So, Darren, thank you for putting confidence in me. I hope I don't give you something that's not correct. But in my opinion, Ben, you have to pick your battle. You cannot say let's figure out what to migrate and what not to migrate. I believe if you're going to migrate to the cloud, just migrate the whole thing. Now, I'm not saying do it lift and shift, do it in one swing, the whole thing. That's not the right way to do it. But eventually, you don't want to say that a few things sit in my on-premises and a few in the cloud, because now you're going to have to somehow keep them in sync. There could be extenuating reasons why you need to keep things on-premises, but I'm seeing more and more those reasons are starting to go away. It used to be that this is such a sensitive, critical workload. I need the high latency guaranteed and security. But there are ways to get that from the cloud. In fact, some people will say cloud is more secure. The loose end is always the human element. That doesn't change. But if you take that out and you look at the number of layers of firewalls and controls and IAM policies, investment in the cloud, people can make an argument that cloud is more secure. Case in point, Capital One. Capital One over the last 5 or 6 years went from a number of data centers to 100% in the cloud. And they're all in on AWS for their data and analytics, and Google Workspace, or whatever it's called now, all the business tools are from Google Cloud. So they shut down all the data centers. I was shocked because I kept hearing because of regulatory reasons, banks cannot do it, but they did it. Now, when I brought it up, somebody said, well, Capital One is only based in the US. They're mostly in credit cards. They're not as big as, let's say, JP Morgan Chase or an international bank. So other banks have more complexity, true, and hence they need to go on their own journey. The point is that pick a destination and then stick to it.
Mm. So that makes sense. And I think to answer this question a little bit of like what do I consider the sort of modern, or the baseline, I guess, for tools in the modern data stack. I would actually in some ways answer this slightly differently. There's a whole bunch of categories in that world where it's like, you have things like data ingestion and data storage and basically warehousing, BI, data transformation, catalogs and observability and all that sort of stuff. I actually don't. I think there are basically 4 baseline categories, which is like the ingestion, the warehouse, the BI part, and some sort of like transformation, semantic modeling, whatever you want to call it. I would actually though go further and say those are actually the only 4 categories. Everything else is essentially one of those things in some sort of like it is like in a different brand. Like there are so many analytics tools that will be like, well, it's not quite BI, it's this other thing. In practice, all of those things eventually collapse down to BI. And I think a lot of these tools are actually that, where those are basically the only 4 things anybody's trying to ever do. And a lot of the other categories are smaller subsets of that eventually find themselves colliding with one of those 4. But I want to get to the cost bit, because this is, like I said, a thing that has come up a lot. And Darren, I'm sure this is something you're very thoughtful about. What's the strategy? This is another question from someone in the audience. Strategies for optimizing cloud costs. So Sanjeev, you mentioned that like 30% of these costs are things that aren't used and stuff like that. Obviously, these migrations to the cloud come with a lot of costs that can look very like sort of cost saving on day one, and then over time things ramp, and all of a sudden you've got a much bigger bill and those sorts of things. So I'm curious what y'all see is ways for people to be able to manage compute resources and things like that, given now that we're all a lot more cost conscious than we probably were 18 months ago.
Typical strategies in the case of my team. So we do a lot of monitoring and observation. We are an R&D team, so we don't want to do a lot of administrative stuff. So what we do is we try to set the policy. For example, because you can write SQL, it doesn't mean you should pull a gigabyte query. It's just too crazy. We don't think you need anything more than a gigabyte query. So we have some policy about, hey, we capped you at one gigabyte if you run the query, and if you need something more, then let's talk, and we will help you to optimize your query. The other one is there's a lot of waste in the data usage. For example, like people just build something and then they just throw it because they don't have to pay for it. So we typically having a process to go and consolidate all those things or decommission all the things that people build halfway or no one use. So ultimately, if you are a data person or if you want to do something for your audience, we measure how many views, how many adoption that you got. If the data assets that are actually like being consuming resource and no one is looking at it, or just a few people, then we just shut it down. So we have a process just to shut it down and put it in the archive, and if no one asks for a few months, we put it away. So those are the things that control things on the usage level. Make sure that our audience, our users are being aware of the costs associated with their queries and their data usage.
Sanjeev, I'm sure this is a thing you probably consult on now. What are you hearing?
So FinOps has been a very important topic for a few years. This year, it's become even more important. So in fact, there is a whole FinOps community and organization under Linux Foundation. You can get certified. You can be a certified FinOps practitioner. That is how important FinOps is. The interesting thing is, I'm listening to Darren, and I'm thinking that they've got all these policies, but the problem is getting more and more complicated because it's at the SQL level, it's at the infrastructure level. So there is now a subset of FinOps in the data space. There are these companies that are called the data observability companies. A lot of these data observability companies started as data quality monitoring. To be frank, that was their origin, to see, is the data complete? Is the data fresh? Do we have duplicates? Are we missing things? But now a lot of these companies have migrated into FinOps. So they will tell you how much is a query going to cost. And if the query is going to run away, then they can even stop it. The whole idea is that the CFO has a budget, and what's happening in the cloud is that you allocate a certain amount of money to do your cloud computing. 6 months into it, you've blown the budget out. In fact, there's a big news that is going on right now. Datadog was getting $65 million from Coinbase. That's the big news of this week, just to monitor. So this is how important monitoring and observability has become, because it can proactively tell you what's going wrong. In fact, the FinOps piece is not even just at the SQL level. It is even at, am I using the right number of brokers for my Kafka topics? If my brokers are only consuming 25% of CPU per node, then these FinOps products, data observability products, can tell me that you may want to downgrade to a smaller instance type and save money.
So observability and optimization. And
Yes.
then the other aspect is also to help our user as well, to make sure that, for example, we created the data set, and then we actually make sure that all the data sets are very clear. So when users need something, they don't need to go hunt around. That also can and create bad queries. That also can help to reduce the cost, and especially the traffic and the performance of our data stack.
Yeah. So these FinOps products are actually very interesting, because they can show you cost at a very granular level, and they can which actually other FinOps, the bigger FinOps, cannot show you, because they don't understand data. So they can show you that your certain workloads were like machine learning training is costing you X. They can also show you at user level. So they can show that Darren is writing all these SQL statements that is costing a lot of money, and Darren belongs to the R&D team. So maybe you want to do a chargeback to the R&D team. So you see, it's at the user level, at the workload level, even at the resource level. You can say my BigQuery cost is so much versus my Collibra cost, for instance, or my data cleansing. So that's how granular these products have become.
So we have about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure I have time for some questions here from the audience. And so we've got a few that I want to get to. One is about what to avoid. So basically, like, as you're designing a data stack, there's a lot of things out there about the right things to do. People are trying to sell you tools, all those sorts of things. What's something that, in trying to do this, or something you've heard from your consulting clients, Sanjeev, that is a thing that folks should try to avoid when designing a data stack?
So the first thing to avoid is resume busting technologies. It's true. I've spoken to people. They're like, I'm going with this non-relational database. I'm like, yeah, but you already have, let's say, Oracle, and Oracle can do the job. They're like, yeah, but I need to have this database on my resume. So don't get carried away by hype. Business comes first. There are no technology projects in the world. Technology projects are there to support a business outcome. So think through, what does the business really need, and how can I best deploy it. We cannot control what's coming down the pike. So if we start jumping into these new technologies, for example, tomorrow the business may come down heavily on the data team and say, I'm hearing everybody's talking about ChatGPT. When am I getting a natural language interface into my database? I want to be able to ask questions. So you have to. So the most important thing I would say, take a long-term view. Not like short-term, let's fix this with this newfangled technology and this tool and that tool. And then you basically accumulate technical debt. And then over the long run, now you have to redo some of these pieces that you put together. So simplify. Over complexity is the biggest problem of modern data stack.
How can I ask a follow-up question? So
Sure.
what do you suggest as the first step to build out the modern data stack, going from the greenfield? What would be the first step?
So the first step is to understand the technology at a slightly deeper level than what we do today. So today at surface, all technologies, we have so many products now. They all sound very similar. So Ben, I think you may have even written about it. When you go a level deeper is when you start understanding that, oh wow, this will require me to have a completely new cluster, extract the data into that, process it, put it back into my database. Why would I do that? Because as I expand my data, so Darren, you mentioned you're getting telemetry data from your customers using VMware. As they use more and more, your data would turn into petabytes. Are you going to be able to control such massive data movements? So you want to understand the technologies far deeper and then see, does it meet my current stack or does it break it? And if it breaks it, then don't do it. So the answers to all of these questions, by the way, is so easy. The simple answer is it depends.
Always is.
It always is.
Yeah.
So another question that came in that I want to ask both of y'all is, and this is also in the news a little bit with Microsoft's big release the last couple of days. So they released something called Fabric, which is basically like a kind of unifying layer among the various Microsoft data tools, trying to kind of be a one-stop shop for everything you need in your data stack. How do y'all feel about the not necessarily Microsoft product in general, which I think is still in a beta, and we're still kind of learning things about, but the decision folks have of either choosing a one-stop shop solution, whether or not it be from Microsoft or potentially Databricks or Google or some like very big vendor, versus going more of a componentized route, more open source, more kind of best of breed. How do y'all think about that trade-off? When does that depend, Sanjeev, of like which side do you choose for those?
Yeah.
Darren, I'm interested in your take too, as someone again who's probably facing these decisions every day.
So Ben, we have seen the pendulum shift constantly: centralized, decentralized, back to centralized. The right answer is it's always going to be hybrid. The way I advise my clients to think about is, I'm not a big fan of centralizing everything. When you centralize everything, you get a central data engineering team, and that gets bottlenecked, which means that the business is not able to get the results as fast as they want. So what I say is, if you break your architecture, your stack into the front end, business facing data apps and products, decentralize that, because departments have the subject matter experts. They understand the context of data. Data engineers don't. If you have a clinical trial data, what does a data engineer know about where this came from and what is the meaning of this DNA and mRNA and what? Give that to the data team, decentralize that, let them, and it somewhat goes into the data mesh space, although I'm not at all proposing that, but decentralize that. But when it comes to the infrastructure, I think what Microsoft announced with Fabric is the right move. Now, whether they execute on or not, time will tell. But it is the right move. Google has Dataplex. IBM announced their own thing. SAP also announced, because that's the plumbing. That's stuff that you should not have to spend. It is what AWS called the undifferentiated heavy lifting. And that, to me, should be minimized as much as possible.
Darren, what's your thought?
I could agree with Sanjeev. Meaning having the end-to-end data stack to one vendor. Of course, there are convenience to it, and then just like Geico, they say, "Oh, buy everything from us, and it's cheaper." Blah blah blah. So they want to make that case. But I'm generally fairly scared about betting everything on just one vendor. I still think at this moment, the choosing the best breed in each of the data layer, and data they I haven't seen like there's a lot of incompatibility between layers. Of course, if you want to be a platform, want to be a data player, you need to play in the data ecosystem. So in that regard, I think choosing the best of breed in every layers, and especially based on the situation of the business requirements, based on the expertise of your data team, and what could make you help you to operate efficiently. I think, and also some of the cost component as well.
Yeah.
I think it's the right thing to do.
So, so if I clarify, by the way, I completely agree with you. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. If that vendor goes down, what happens? So we have tried in the past to have one Uber system that does everything in it. It's got integration, governance, management, data ops, all of that, and that has not succeeded. You cannot have an Uber software that does it all. What Microsoft Fabric and some other vendors have done is actually more of an open, it's a loose collection of things. If you're a Microsoft shop and you're a small, medium business, there's no reason for you to go to a third party. Maybe that is the right solution for you to take all native tools. But even in Microsoft Fabric's announcement, if I am, let's say, using Alation as my data catalog, I still want to keep using it. I don't want to use Microsoft Purview. Fabric should allow me to have an easy API connection. Informatica is another example. Informatica is a partner of Microsoft Fabric. So it's not like everything is coming from the same vendor, but it's sort of pre-integrated. So it's taking you maybe 60, 80% there, but then after that, you use your own tools.
And I also and besides that, I also believe in the innovation. If we don't if we don't bet everything, if everything is just Amazon or Microsoft or Tableau, then what's the innovation from others, right? So the I'm a fan of having new innovation, have different way to do things, and big companies, they're amazing, innovative machine. But they do have the innovators dilemma. They actually have to focus on a few use cases, do it very well. So having the choices in the different layers are also good for us data people, because now we actually have different innovative way, and I'm a big fan of having that kind of innovation from into our data stack.
So we got 1 minute left. I got one more question for you, Darren, in the last 60 seconds here before we wrap things up related to that. So someone asked a question basically of like, what makes the modern data stack modern other than the cloud? I want to kind of extend that a little bit to your point about innovation, which is like, what sort of innovations do you want to see? Like what you're excited about the innovation that other players can bring that aren't the Microsofts and Amazons and Tableaus of the world. What is innovation that you would be excited to see if folks are out there thinking about the next thing they want to build? What is it that you would be most anxious to be able to get your hands on?
I want to see, just like everything else, just like everyone else, I'm actually get swept away with the AI wave. And for AI, there's actually more of the training data, and I'm hoping to be able to do things that to build models, to use data to get into more AI, to do what sort of big companies are being able to do right now, like Google, Facebook can do right now. I can't wait for us to be able to have those capability to build a model and apply some of the benefits of AI into the work we do. So that's what I'm excited about. I don't know how it's gonna look in a few yet. I don't know how it's gonna look like yet. But that actually excites me the most.
Awesome. So we are right at time. We're going to have to end things there. But thank you so much, Darren. Thank you so much, Hansi, for joining us. Appreciate the time. And thank you for everybody who was able to attend.
Thank you so much.